Hey guys, welcome back to Horse 2 Cinema. So today I have a video for you guys that I've been wanting to do for a while. I really miss doing a lot of those like director rankings videos. I've done some for John Carpenter, Tarantino. I think I did Christopher Nolan a while back. So there's a few of them you can go back and watch if you're interested. But yeah, no. So one I've had my mind on a lot recently is Sam Raimi, one of my favorite filmmakers of all time. And just a little shout out to Red Letter Media. They recently did one of their rankings on Sam Raimi. So with that, plus the fact that Send Help came out recently, and I haven't had a chance to formally review it on the channel yet, I figured this would be a great chance to talk about it as well. So yeah, that's what we're going to do today. Going to be ranking all, I believe, 16 of Sam Raimi's films. And of course, I'm only including feature-length films here, so I'm not going to be counting Ash versus Evil Dead. One, I actually haven't seen it yet. I'm really excited to finally get around to that. But yeah, I mean, it's more of a TV show. He didn't even direct all of it. I know he directed like the first few episodes kind of thing, but so yeah, feature length films. So in last place at number 16, I am going to go with his second feature length film, which is Crime Wave. So he made this immediately after The Evil Dead, I believe in like the early 80s. Like this, I think this came out in 84 or something like that. And it was kind of the result of, the studios finally deciding to throw money at the guys who made The Evil Dead. Which is a pretty cool idea. And you can obviously, I think as I'll discuss a little bit more throughout the video, I think Sam Raimi is very adept at making non-horror movies. And with something like Crime Wave, this kind of like funny kind of like Coen Brothers type story. I think they probably could have done it pretty well, or Sam Raimi could have probably done it pretty well. But from what I understand, it was a bit of a mess in terms of who, the studio trying to put their own voice into it, and Sam Raimi not really vibing with that. And so the result you get is just kind of a mess that just doesn't really cohere together in any enjoyable way. I mean that both in how successful it is at this kind of sillier crime movie kind of tone, but also just literally like in the final edit. Like I think the way that this film was edited together in its final cut is borderline kind of incoherent. Like it's a very hard movie to follow, and in addition to that, it's just also not very funny. Like I can see, like I was thinking a lot about Raising Arizona, which the Coen brothers I think would later do a few years later with the kind of zany like crime comedy sort of thing. But this just doesn't have. I mean, it doesn't have the meat like this sort of like personal or family kind of drama that movie has, and just the gags in that movie are funny, and they're not funny in Crime Wave. So there's a couple of like filmmaking flashes that are interesting, but if you're not doing a Sam Raimi like completionism thing, I don't really know why you would watch this. Number 15 for me is going to be Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness. This might seem pretty low on the list of some people, but personally, I just really can't stand when Sam Raimi is like constrained and really reined in by the studio. And so a lot of those movies where that's the case are really low on my list. There's one exception, which I'll talk about later. I don't know. I remember when I saw this, I didn't see it in theaters. I think I saw it on a plane or something months later because I was kind of like out on the Marvel stuff at that time. Still am for the most part. But yeah, I just remember thinking like, okay, it's cool that Sam Raimi's back, but and there's a couple of touches I like, but for the most part, I just felt like he was really reined in with what he wanted to, with what he would have wanted to do by sort of making this into more of an Evil Dead type horror comedy. Yeah, I think there's a lot of like interesting flashes like where a couple characters basically turn into like Evil Dead hags, and there's that giant like eye monster and stuff. So there's a lot of cool images that I would imagine in a Sam Raimi movie, but it's just really like glossy and CG, like a lot of Marvel stuff at the time. And like when you're watching a Sam Raimi movie, that's kind of not what you want. And when you're not seeing creative Sam Raimi touches, it is a lot of the same kind of standard Marvel stuff where it's just like you know they put a couple characters against a CGI backdrop, they do some exposition dumps and kind of shoot the whole thing in shot reverse shot, and that's pretty much it. And I know that a lot of this stuff is kind of a given when you're talking about the MCU, and like um and again, like I'd rather watch this than some of the other kind of more boring like MCU movies that they've done in the past like 5 years. But the other thing too that's frustrating about this, and some of the other MCU stuff, is that uh, from a story perspective, the whole interesting arc that they try to go for in this with Wanda being the villain really doesn't make a lot of sense unless you watched WandaVision. And even then, from what I've heard, it kind of goes back on some of that stuff from the TV show. So it's kind of like the worst of both worlds, where it's a betrayal of the show, but then it's also not very interesting in its own right. She's just kind of like standard, evil lady in the movie. So yeah, I remember I was kind of excited to see Sam Raimi come back to the world of superheroes a little bit, but I knew when I saw the trailer, I was like, this is not going to be good. And the world has changed so much in terms of that kind of filmmaking that I don't even think he could make a good movie in that genre anymore. All right, moving on to my number 14, which is For Love of the Game. I probably have the least to say about this one. I didn't end up rewatching it, which I probably should have, since I haven't seen it since I was a little kid. I just couldn't be bothered. And it's weird because I should like this movie more than I do. It's I love sports movies, and it's got a really fun kind of setup for a sports movie. I generally love sports movies where the technical stakes for the actual game are quite low, but the personal stakes for the character are high. And here you have an aging pitcher for a bad team late in the season, and he's throwing all his personal frustration into this athletic performance. I love the detail too that he's so lost in kind of the personal like flashbacks that we're getting throughout the film, kind of retelling his relationship struggles. He's so lost in kind of thinking about all that he doesn't actually realize until the eighth inning that he's pitching a perfect game. But like, even though I like the setup, I think there's two really big problems with this movie. One is that it is a relationship drama where the relationship drama is incredibly boring. Like, I don't remember anything about about Billy and his wife. Again, some of that is I probably should have ended up rewatching it before this, but I mean, I don't know. I saw it a couple times as a kid. I feel okay about saying that it's not a very memorable relationship. The other issue is that it's kind of, from a filmmaking perspective, this being a baseball movie and especially being a Sam Raimi movie, it's just kind of boring formally. The baseball sequences aren't shot in a way that really shows off his style, and they just don't really stand out visually in any way, despite how incredible it is, what the character is accomplishing. At number 13, I'm going to go with Oz the Great and Powerful. I ended up not being as low on this as I thought maybe I would be, having heard so much about it for years. But yeah, it's still not very good. I really like the way the opening section of the film is shot. It's all in black and white, and it has this kind of less than 4:3 aspect ratio that's pretty cool. The character work they're doing with Franco in that section is serviceable, but it's not really anything you wouldn't have seen in film noir movies, or specifically the movie I was thinking about a lot for this is Nightmare Alley. Really, either version of it, either the 40s one or the recent Guillermo del Toro one, with all the carnival stuff and kind of him being a con man. As somebody who loves Sam Raimi, I did really like the sequence where Mila Kunis finally turns into the Wicked Witch of the West. It's pretty fun getting around the whole, like, it's hard to do a transformation sequence in a PG-13 movie, but they sort of get around that by, they point the camera at the shadow, and so you can kind of imagine like what all, the pain she's going through. But unfortunately, when we finally actually see her, especially seeing her face as the witch, it just looks incredibly like digitally altered and like kind of shiny. And that's another issue with the movie, is that as a whole it has this very like shiny kind of very digital, glossy kind of look to it. And when you compare it in your head to its main influence, The Wizard of Oz, I mean, that sticks out like a sore thumb. I also do agree with the criticism that's talked about a lot, which is that both James Franco and Mila Kunis are pretty miscast in their roles. I think if you're going to go for like a con man type character, you need an actor who can pull off being a likable, dislikable person, and if that makes sense. Some like the Bradley Cooper character in Nightmare Alley. I think his performance, like he does kind of pull off that sort of dilemma, with having that sort of movie star, like everyman sort of quality, while being incredibly bad and unlikable. Franco, he's like halfway there for me. Like I could sort of see what they were thinking with the casting, but it just doesn't really totally work in its execution. Like, I don't believe that the town like ends up like falling in love with him, the way that is supposed to happen in the story of Oz. And for Mila Kunis, I just don't really see her as like the Wicked Witch of the West kind of. I don't know. I think those two roles are pretty miscast for me. It's very like shiny and glossy, like I said. But overall, like I did not hate this as much as I thought maybe I would. So at number 12, we're done with the movies that I just straight up don't like. Everything here on upward I do enjoy. But this is kind of the most mid one, I would say. It's the only one I would give 3 stars. which is The Gift. I felt like I could never really get into this one fully. I mean, it's very simplistic, kind of standard filmmaking for Sam Raimi, which, there's a couple of other movies that are like that for him, that I do really enjoy, and I'll talk about those later. Um, but that combined with, I have just never been into movies that much that are about like clairvoyance, essentially. I think the closest thing to a movie about clairvoyance that I really love is The Sixth Sense, which is not really about clairvoyance in the traditional sense. It's more about this, and particularly the angle of it being a kid is very different as well. So yeah, I don't know. This was not designed to appeal to me in a major way, and I think the central mystery of the film in general for me is not very satisfying. It's on a just predictability level. I felt very early on, I was like, I know what this twist is going to be. It's very easy to see. And a lot of it's just the execution, the way that he directs it. I mean, focusing on that character, I won't totally spoil who it is, but if you've seen a David Lynch movie, any movie where, it's sort of about exposing the darker underbelly behind, suburbia, or like, in this case, like Southern genteel society, I think you're pretty much going to know where this goes. I think what the film has going for it, though, is that it does have really good performances all around. Kate Blanchett, I really like in the lead role. In particular, I really love Keanu Reeves as very much playing against type, where he was kind of I think this is around the time of The Matrix, and here he is playing a total, like, abusive husband kind of character, and really pulling it off. There's also lots of really good supporting performances throughout the film from Greg Kinnear, Katie Holmes, Kim Dickens, always playing a Southern character. Rosemary Harris, who would later play Aunt May, is in this. Yeah, so especially for the performances, I can see why people really like this. And if you like this kind of movie about like clairvoyance and that kind of mystery, you might like this more than me. I know some people probably like this a little bit more than I do. But yeah, for me, it's like the most medium, mid-range of Sam Raimi's movies. So moving on up, my number 11 is Spider-Man 3. If 7-year-old Jackson was doing this list in 2007, this would absolutely be number one on my list. I think this is probably the most excited I've ever been for a movie to come out. I was a huge fan of Spider-Man 1 and 2. I'll talk about them later. But yeah, as a kid, that was my gateway into superhero stuff. And so I was seeing this opening day. You can talk to my parents. I was unbelievably excited for this. And I also loved it in the theater. I didn't know anything about the backlash to this movie until years after it came out. Which is kind of funny in hindsight, because a lot of the flaws are pretty glaring, but there are also things that a 7-year-old wouldn't care about. For example, like the main thing with this is that the studio forced Sam Raimi to just do too many plots related to different villains. The studio made him add Venom to it. I think they ended up doing even a little bit more with Sandman than probably what he wanted to do. But as a 7-year-old kid, you're just like, oh, multiple villains, this is so cool. Yeah, and on rewatch, that stuff really does stand out. The stuff I will defend, though, absolutely, is all of the emo Spider-Man stuff. I think that stuff is really funny. To me, whenever I watch it, the way it reads is like Sam Raimi wanted to like fuck with the studio because he had been so unhappy with the conditions of making that movie, and he just decides to like turn this one bit of the movie into a total like cartoon show. And in addition to all of the like ways I'll defend that stuff and kind of the contrarian stuff with this film, I think there's also a lot that's widely agreed is quite good. I really like the effects of Sandman, especially like the scene where he is turned into Sandman, and then like sort of he's basically destroyed and then comes back out of the sand. And I think that I still mostly enjoy the relationship between Peter and Harry in this. I think it gets a little bit sidetracked because they give him the whole he gets hit on the head and he forgets the whole ordeal. That ruins a lot of the drama that could have happened for a lot of the movie. But when they go back to it, I think it's pretty solid. And the stuff with Mary Jane is kind of written very cartoonishly, as she is for a lot of the Spider-Man movies, but I still don't really mind it that much in this. I mean, it is that it still has Sam Raimi's kind of heightened style. I don't take it too seriously. So while it's super flawed, it's very easy for me to just put on and enjoy. My number 10 is his most recent movie, and the one I kind of made this video in order to talk about, which is Send Help. I was super excited when I heard that he was doing a non sort of franchise movie again after Doctor Strange 2. I was just like, I really hope this guy hasn't washed his last movie or before that wasn't very well reviewed, Oz the Great and Powerful. So I was like, please don't be washed, my goat. But yeah, no. So I went into this with an open mind. I liked the premise in the trailer that it's kind of sets up of Rachel McAdams being this kind of like schleppy sort of office person who like isn't very popular around the office but is really good at her job, and she wants to climb the corporate ladder a little bit. So she goes on this trip to Bangkok, and then on the way the plane crashes, and they're stuck. She's stuck on a desert island with her boss, who she absolutely hates. I love how much Sam Raimi is able to get out of that basic setup in this movie. There's so many bits where the Rachel McAdams character kind of uses this situation to, really show the power that she has. It is funny, like how good she is at a lot of the survival stuff, and they don't really explain a lot of that other than they show a very brief clip of her early in the movie watching Survivor, which is kind of funny. But she, yeah, I mean, like he has the her boss has a broken leg, and so she's really like providing for him for a lot, and that kind of like flips their power dynamic, and it turns into a lot of great set pieces. I absolutely love the one with the boar where she goes hunting, and then she comes back like completely bloodied up, and yeah, there's a lot of other similar kind of gags throughout the film where I was like, oh yay, like demented, gross out Sam Raimi's finally back. I think the script makes some choices that I would call questionable. I think in terms, it's another one like The Gift where I think the main twist of the movie is incredibly predictable. Um, and just in terms of I don't know, there were times where I thought it was going to go in a different direction, possibly a more interesting direction. If they were going to try and maybe build up some kind of a weird, demented romance between these characters, and it kind of doesn't end up doing that. And the ending, I kind of had to. I was going back and forth on for a while as to whether or not I liked it, but I think where I've settled is that I think it's kind of clever and kind of a Paul Verhoeven like satire kind of way. I think as you've seen all of these really cartoonish like set pieces of their dynamic throughout the film, uh, the ending really kind of heightens the silliness of the class systems, the economic systems that have led to the relationship between these characters, and kind of just exposes how silly it is in such an obvious way. That yeah, it did end up working for me. Like I left the theater, it was a lot of fun. I could tell there was a pep in the step for the rest of the audience that was leaving as well. My number 9 is a film that I saw recently for making this video, and it's one I wanted to put higher, but there's just so many movies that I just love that are higher on this list. So I'm gonna go with Darkman here. If you don't know, this is a superhero movie that Sam Raimi did well before making Spider-Man, and it is definitely the case of him trying to apply his like Evil Dead sicko filmmaking to something. I wouldn't even say, I kind of expected it to be him trying to make like maybe a Tim Burton Batman movie. I mean, that was kind of what was popular at the time superhero wise. It's just not that at all. It is really small scale. It's basically like a superhero movie as a Universal monster movie, where you have like the lead character get into this horrible, accident that then they sort of weaponize for their own benefit later, and possibly also become the victim of. This does have some of my favorite sequences in any Sam Raimi movie, like some of the there's that one action set piece in particular. I believe it takes place at a carnival, involving some incredible like collapse zooms. Just one of my favorite sequences he's ever done. I think maybe why it's a little bit lower on my list is just I feel like at times it kind of does drag a little bit. Like it wasn't like as consistently super economical in its pacing and just like consistently exciting the way I thought maybe it would be after hearing about it for years. But Liam Neeson really does a fantastic job as in this role, and again, it's just a small little project that is designed for Sam Raimi to just work his magic behind the camera and do all sorts of crazy shit. At number 8, I've got another movie I just absolutely love, and I wanted to put higher, but I couldn't, which is Army of Darkness. Funny enough, even though I would say this is my least favorite in the Evil Dead trilogy, it's maybe the one I've seen the most. It's an incredibly easy movie to put on, either just at home, on a chill night, or just with, especially with a bunch of friends. It's an absolute riot. I love the central conceit of the film, turning this, what started as a tiny budget, cabin in the woods sort of horror film, and having the conclusion or the epic the epic conclusion to the trilogy be this like Arthurian epic where Ash, who really came alive as a character in Evil Dead 2, is now fully, like a like sassy, sort of swashbuckling lead. And it does have a lot of the best individual moments in the Evil Dead trilogy and in Sam Raimi's filmography in general. I love really just the first opening 15 minutes of this movie where he's in this like gladiator era world, and he ends up being lowered into this pit to fight one of the Deadites. And then like all the blood fountain that happens with that, and then his reaction, "This is my boomstick." All that stuff is just fantastic. I do think at a certain point, maybe like a little less than halfway through, the movie does start to drag just a little bit. I never remember that stuff in the middle quite as much. And I think at times maybe it does get a little bit carried away with some of the physical gags. As much as I do like the one where Bruce Campbell is fighting a bunch of tiny versions of himself, it does go on for a little bit long. It's not necessarily one of my favorite scenes in the movie, and it does break my heart with what a big cult classic this is now. The fact that I believe it flopped pretty good when it came out because it was such a higher budget than the other Evil Dead movies. So it's always gonna have a special place in my heart for that. It's just on a technical level, when I really like have to break it down and compare it to the other Evil Dead movies, it does kind of slot in as a distant third for me. My number 7 is another one that I've caught up with for this list, which is A Simple Plan. This is really the other Sam Raimi movie, like The Gift, where he doesn't have a lot of crazy camera work. He doesn't implement his signature style in the way that he does a lot of the time. This is really the one case where I don't really care because it's just that good of a movie. I really love how I was talking about Crime Wave earlier and how he's worked with the Coen brothers in the past a little bit, and how on that film it just doesn't really come together in the way that the Coen's movies normally do. Some people like this movie. A Simple Plan gets compared to Fargo all the time. For the setting and kind of the crime focus and all that, it being kind of a darker story. But it really is important to mention it's such a different tone than Fargo. Fargo 1 is very very empathetic to the Frances McDormand character immediately. You're just always drawn in with her. It just kind of feels like a warm blanket when you're with her and her husband. And in general, I think the film is really funny, and it has just a lot of in addition to really dark humor, it has a lot of just really fun kind of Midwestern endearing humor as well. A Simple Plan is only, I do think there is humor in it for sure. I think it's a dark comedy, but it is a jet black comedy. It's about these characters just digging themselves further and further into this whole, discovering this, opportunity with finding all this money, and how this whole situation like turns into the characters just turning against each other and just really abandoning their humanity. One really interesting point of comparison is like if you're thinking about this in Fargo, like you think about the kind of the warmth of the Frances McDormand character in Fargo versus the wife of the main character of Bill Paxton's character in this, like basically just egging him on constantly to keep go. Like you're too far into this crime that you're committing, basically to do anything other than continue with this like murder spree that you're on would endanger us, and how can you do that? And it's just really dark to think about it in comparison. So while I think Fargo is the most obvious like comparison people make with this, another one that I thought of a lot was Robert Bresson's final film L'Argent. If you haven't seen that, it is about it's essentially a passing of the torch kind of movie where you start the movie with counterfeit money that ends up in a character's hands, and you sort of follow the money throughout the movie and see how the exchange of this counterfeit money ends up ruining the lives of certain characters. And that movie is very very Bressonian. Like the actors are essentially models. It's very kind of alien what you're watching, and I think kind of the effect is the way that money removes the humanity from people. I think this film is trying to go for something very similar, with this what should be a cozy Midwestern winter setting turning into something that is as bleak and miserable as this film ends up being. So really up my alley. Ended up enjoying this one quite a bit. My number 6, and this is a film that used to be way higher on my list. I still absolutely love it, but this is probably as high as I could justify putting it. Spider-Man. Really, I used to prefer this one to Spider-Man 2, just because I think as superhero origin movies go, this is about as perfect as it gets. Like I've criticized like Batman Begins and movies like that on my channel in the past for being very like it kind of feels like you're just going through the motions of a superhero movie, and like the details of the comic book that about the character. This has some of that, but I think for the most part, it just has so much personality, and it has so many weird like idiosyncrasies about the character that make it kind of stand above the rest for me. I love Tobey Maguire as this like super dorky take on Peter Parker. Some people have made the criticism that everything that he does in these movies, especially this one, is just for Mary Jane. I mean, that's like his whole motivation for joining the wrestling competition and stuff to try to get the car. Um, I'm fine with that. He's a high schooler. He's his head is in the clouds, and he's not thinking rationally necessarily. And his arc in the film is that he does have to start thinking rationally. That he ends up taking Uncle Ben's message of with great power comes great responsibility to heart. Um, and I think that's all kind of done really well. I think it's a movie with a fantastic arc for at least its main character. Some of the other side characters, I don't think Mary Jane is written terribly well in all these movies, but I think she's very functional for what the movie is otherwise going for. And I absolutely also love Willem Dafoe in this movie as the Green Goblin. Is just one of my favorite villain performances in any superhero movie. Love the scenes where he's talking with himself in the mirror. I do wish they went with the original concept art that they had for the Green Goblin, as far as like just his costume and everything. Would have been a lot more Sam Raimi. I think it would have been a lot more like horrific. Maybe they didn't want to do that because of I don't know if it would have changed the rating of the film or anything like that. But overall, I can't remember if it's PG or PG-13, but I think they do a decent job with making it decently violent as well. I really like the scene where he's hiding on the ceiling, and he obviously doesn't want to expose that he's Spider-Man to the rest of his family and Norman Osborn who's there. But that cut on his arm is like dripping down, and he's almost caught there. I used to have this above Spider-Man 2, but as I'll talk about on a rewatch, Spider-Man 2 just stuck out as the one. It's incredible. But this one's no slouch as well. I really do love the first Spider-Man. At number 4, this is my absolute favorite discovery that I made in doing the research for this video: The Quick and the Dead. This is Sam Raimi's only Western film. It stars a whole host of really amazing actors, from Sharon Stone and Gene Hackman, a very young, like pre-Titanic Leonardo DiCaprio, and a pretty young as well Russell Crowe. I think what I love about this the most is that it's a movie you wouldn't necessarily expect Sam Raimi to make. I mean, again, it's his only Western, but it's actually like the perfect vehicle for him. I mean, he loves genre. I think horror and action are like his main things. And this has, a little bit of both, actually. I think with some of the mystical elements of, especially the Gene Hackman character, and him kind of, it's kind of alluded that he's like the devil. I thought a little bit about like High Plains Drifter, for example. And then certainly with the action, I think that the action in this is kind of a precursor to what he would end up doing with Spider-Man. The central like conceit of the movie, where it's kind of a sports movie in a way. Like the whole thing is built around this like gunfire like tournament where characters duel each other to the death. In a March Madness bracket style sort of thing. I think all those sequences are done so well, where they kind of show the intercutting of the clock tower and then characters' different reactions. They have a lot of zooms into the action that's taking place. It's just actually like a perfect vehicle for Sam Raimi's style in a movie that you otherwise wouldn't expect, to be a great Sam Raimi vehicle. I also really just love revisionist westerns, and I think this does a great job with doing something different with the formula. Sharon Stone as this sort of like hardened but still very vulnerable like lead character. Like you don't really see a female lead in westerns very much, and it's not done in like an insulting way either. I think she just has a lot of nuance and vulnerability again to her character, and I think the central like revenge factor that she has against the Gene Hackman character is super engaging, and you're like rooting for her throughout, even for being a flawed character as she is. And Gene Hackman is just amazing. Again, like he's basically playing like the devil as like this like the leader of this town, who is a total sharpshooter and has this incredible reputation. It reminded me a lot, honestly, of like my favorite westerns being the Sergio Corbucci westerns, where the villains are not just like bad cowboys, but are like fascist pricks, pretty much. Certainly, I thought a lot about the villains in Django, or even like Klaus Kinski in The Great Silence. Like it's that level of a villain performance for a Western for me. So yeah, this was just blown away by this one. Loved it. All right, top 4 here. These are all just absolute masterpieces for me. These are just all-time favorites for sure. Number 4, I did end up going with The Evil Dead here. Evil Dead is a movie that is definitely rough around the edges, and I think sometimes when I talk to big fans of Evil Dead 2, this is maybe a little bit less liked amongst them, and also fans of Army of Darkness for sure. For me, it is. I go back and forth sometimes between it and Evil Dead 2 as my favorite in the trilogy. I mean, I'm gonna pick Evil Dead 2, but it's closer than I would have thought. I actually watched this recently for a discussion I led with the Denver Cinema Club on Video Nasties, and I think it's fairly easy to see why it made its way onto the list. It's not that. I mean, it is pretty gory as well. But the main reason I think it made its way onto the list is the scene with the tree and essentially the sexual assault that happens with that. It is like more explicit than I remembered it being necessarily. I still don't think it goes nearly as far as a lot of the other movies on the Video Nasties list in terms of like sexual violence, but it does hit hard. And I think even Sam Raimi has said that he went a bit far with that scene. I've got to say though, I think that it does play into like the sleaziness fact of the movie and kind of the illicit quality that it has. When you watch The Evil Dead, you really feel like even if you're a grown ass adult like I am, you really feel like you're watching something you shouldn't be. And I think that scene with the tree, but really just the whole movie and like the gore and stuff, it's so much more tactile and kind of like realistic, the violence. Whereas Evil Dead 2, he really does kind of take it into a more like cartoonish, like Three Stooges kind of direction. As much as I prefer that, and I think that's Sam Raimi's signature style. I don't know. It hit really hard for me, and it really stuck out as like one of the better like splatter films that's been made. And I think it has a lot of genuinely really scary moments. The scenes where some of the Deadites are trapped in the basement, and just kind of the geography of how Raimi directs that set piece is pretty amazing. And my absolute favorite one is the card scene. I remember when I first saw that years ago, finally discovering this movie, that scene like gave me the feeling of like a night terror, like when you're in the middle of the night and you realize you're trapped in a nightmare, and you get this like rush in your legs, this kind of feeling like you're falling. It was like that for me, and I can't really say that about too many other Sam Raimi movies. So I think this and another one I'll talk about up on the list have like some of the scariest moments in his films. But yeah, I absolutely love The Evil Dead. At number 3, I'm going to go with Spider-Man 2. So for the longest time, Spider-Man, the first one, was my favorite of the trilogy, but this was always a close second for sure. And on revisiting it, I just think it's like the perfect like Sam Raimi superhero film. It has, for as much as I like the basic kind of setup for, the with great power comes great responsibility arc in the first movie, the stuff in this where he's so like weakened throughout the film, Peter Parker. Like he really is one of the more vulnerable superheroes I can think of. And kind of losing his powers and his relationship falling apart. Him not really being able to stop the villain in a lot of places. And that building up to what he decides to do at the end with Mary Jane it's incredible. It's just a perfectly written arc. I think also, as much as I love the Green Goblin in the first movie and some of the stuff with, like Sandman in the second one or in the third one, this is the scene with Doc Ock, particularly like in the hospital where his mechanical arms start like killing all the doctors and stuff like that. It is like the best horror that we see in any of these like superhero movies that he did. I love the shot in particular where the woman is like being pulled into the dark and her fingernails are like scraping against the floor. And there's just a lot of really funny side characters too that make a superhero movie really enjoyable and fun to watch. I love the Asif Madbi thing at the beginning with the pizza man. I love that when they introduced Mr. Ditkovich and he's just always obsessed about the rent. I don't know. It's perfect. It's really like one of the best superhero movies ever made, I think. At number 2, I'm going to go with a film that I saw a long time ago, and it absolutely scared the shit out of me. And uh, I was like, I'm never watching this again. And I became a horror fan years later and started to love this stuff. And then when I rewatched it like a year or two ago, I couldn't stop laughing, which is Drag Me to Hell. I remember very distinctly after Spider-Man 3, because I was just starting to pay attention to who directors were and things like that. So I remember like seeing the trailer for Drag Me to Hell. It was like a Sam Raimi film from the director of Spider-Man. And then I saw this like absolutely horrific trailer with this like old lady putting a curse on this woman, and this Lamia demon who in the trailer was mainly showed like his shadow like lurking outside the house and stuff. It absolutely scared me to death. And in high school I watched it. I still wasn't very accustomed to horror movies. Really scared me as well. And then I caught up with it last year. Got to see it in theaters at the Alamo Drafthouse Terror Tuesday. And yeah, it just, I think it's one of his funniest movies. It's just a hilarious horror comedy. I mean, like from the set piece with the goat, like yelling at her when they're doing the whole exorcism thing at a certain point, to all of the bits where like the old lady like assaults her and like basically like starts vomiting in her mouth and shit like that. It's just unbelievably funny. And that theater experience really solidified this as like one of his masterpieces for me, because it is, I think, other than Evil Dead 2, it is the most, and maybe even including Evil Dead 2, it's the most perfect balance he's ever achieved of horror and comedy. Like the scenes I talked about, like being scared of as a kid, of the old lady and the shadow demon and all that, were still scary. They're well timed. They direct it, for horror fans as opposed to just general audiences who might eat up any jump scare. Um, so that stuff's scary, and then it has all the super goofy stuff, like with the goat, with the vomit, all that stuff. I also just love how many different genres of horror he's able to put in this, like, and just kind of meld it all together and make it work. I mean, there's hagsploitation, there's moral dilemma, kind of fable with the idea that like this character, should be doing something for this woman, and then when she doesn't do the right thing, she's cursed. There's there's the whole like occult possession thing that happens later. The fact that nobody believes her about the ordeal that she's going through, kind of is like a Italian like gaslighting thriller a little bit. Like it's just incredible. Like the amalgamation of all those different things. I think what I ended up saying was that is it his best film? Probably not, but it has moments that are funnier than Army of Darkness and scarier than The Evil Dead. And I don't know. I just wish this one was talked about more, because I think it's a total masterpiece. And speaking of masterpieces, there's no denying it. My number one absolutely is The Evil Dead 2. This is just one of my favorite movies of all time to put on. I think that there's quite a few different people in my life who I've shown it to, who I wouldn't necessarily describe as horror fans, but when they watch this, they're right on the same wavelength with me in terms of loving the total goofy sicko shit. I think Sam Raimi's described this before as, he wanted to turn the Three Stooges into, instead of whipped cream pies, it's gore essentially. And that's what he does. It's the first movie again in a lot of ways. I mean, there's so many parallels of the two, with like the bridge at the beginning. I love the matte painting, by the way, and the model that they do with that in Evil Dead 2. That special effect is great. And then yeah, like the cabin in the wood stuff is very similar, but it's I don't know, they increase the budget, and they dial up the filmmaking to 11 to really just make this like a once in a lifetime, what the fuck am I watching kind of experience. And there's so many great lines, from Groovy obviously to, I think my personal favorite, it's not even a line, it's after he has to chop off his arm, and they show the stack of books, and the top one is A Farewell to Arms. And on my most recent rewatch of this, I think last October, the thing that I like kind of forgot about is how much of the movie is dialogue free. It's almost like he tried to make like a pantomime out of this, like where the expressiveness of the movie is purely, it's almost like a silent movie, with a couple of cool one-liners in there, because so much of the comedy is just physical Charlie Chaplin, Buster Keaton kind of stuff. And I think it's really just the movie that perfectly puts together Sam Raimi's talents of horror, comedy, and ingenious filmmaking, always trying to make something as interesting as it could be, Sam Raimi is never the kind of guy who would open his movie with, as Brian De Palma has talked about, like just the shot of a helicopter shot of a cityscape or something like that. He is interested in genre filmmaking expressed through the camera primarily, the script secondarily. And I love him for that. I think he's just one of the goats, and it was a blast to revisit all these films in making this video. So thank you guys very much for watching. If you like this video, you can like it down below and subscribe to the channel if you're new. I've got more videos coming out soon, and I will see you guys in the next one. See ya.